chance might be the last, the only and the best. We will watch our words go down. We both are real upset. The battle never ends. Lest opposition gains the ground. Now do what you want. Now refuse or deals.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Rob.
How are you?
Welcome.
Thanks.
Good, how are you? Can you hear us well?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get right to it, I guess.
Good to go.
Good to go. Yeah. Thank you for sending me the book. I bought it yesterday, no, day before. Because I was curious as to how much more you can share. I mean, you have shared a lot in your Facebook and YouTube presence already. So,
Yeah. I'm glad to. How'd you like the book so far?
well, honestly, I've gone through it with my eyes, but I haven't read it yet. In a couple days, I just didn't make it. But
Right. Well, there's a lot there to absorb. I wouldn't expect you to get through it all in a couple days, but
that's the thing. It goes so deep, and it goes all across the board. There's not just geometry and math and mysticism in there. It's
sure.
much more than that, and all comes together. So it's really a theme that, to take that on is quite a huge thing, and I think nobody has dug as deep as you have, seemingly, maybe the builders themselves.
Well, it's not so much I dug as much as I kind of tripped over it, I guess. But yeah.
Right, and that is
Yeah.
maybe an interesting story for our guests because we know maybe what you do, but how you came to it, maybe you can just share a little bit how that all started for you.
Sure. It basically. It was a long time in the making. In October of 2000, I suffered a asthma attack. It was pretty bad, and I just had a feeling I wasn't going to make it, and it turned out I was clinically dead for a short time during.
Hello? I think you're breaking up a little, Rob. Do you hear us still?
Oh,
Hello.
Hey, you were breaking up a little bit, and then you
Mhm.
were gone.
did you lose me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
The quality
I'm
is not
sorry, I
the best.
have a horrible connection right now, and there is some weather right now. So I don't know if that's going to play or interfere with what we're going to do, but the best
All
I
right,
can do is just say we go with it, you know.
let's go with it. Whatever may come, we're gonna stand this one out as well. You do sound better. So we lost you when you were starting to talk about your clinically death for a few minutes out of body experience.
Sure. I was obviously I had an asthma attack and was struggling, and I was actually dead for a time during that experience, and I had an out of body experience where I basically it's really hard to describe what I really experienced, but to sum it up, I basically was connected with mass consciousness, the human consciousness. I obtained certain knowledge that would pertain later to my work, but of course, obviously, I didn't stay in this state. The doctors obviously revived me and stabilized my condition. And when I came to, I really couldn't make sense of what I had experienced, and it would be another 10 years before I actually made any sense out of that whole experience.
Hmm.
And actually, it was when I was just kind of stumbling across through YouTube films one day and looking at films about architecture and stuff, and I came across the film by Scott Onstadt called Secrets in Plain Sight, and I just started watching this film, and the first segment kind of goes into certain aspects of Washington D.C. and I started to watch the film. I kind of realized that there were some key elements of this puzzle that were missing, and I kind of had a feeling I knew what they were. And so I started playing around with this. I had some doubt, of course, but started playing around with this all, and I kind of confirmed that I did, in fact, kind of have a couple of missing keys to this great puzzle that is Washington, D.C. And so it was really about a 10-year process of really just trying to understand what happened during that whole near-death experience. And I definitely did a lot of soul searching after that, and I searched a number of avenues with no answers, and it was just kind of a dead end kind of thing until 10 years later I saw this film, and everything just kind of clicked and fell into place. And I kind of, at the same time that I kind of made sense of this whole Washington D.C. mystery, I kind of made sense of my whole experience with this near-death experience as well.
Hmm.
And so, and then things really got interesting. And
then you started to
I
doing
guess that's
some
where.
research in the fields that then led you to
Sure.
understand.
Well, let's start with Dan Brown's books, because my research is really it really has absolutely nothing to do with his books, but yet it actually parallels what his books are about in a number of very interesting, peculiar ways.
Hmm.
I think one of the reasons his books are so popular is because he mixes the fact and the fiction, and it makes a great story, but then it also adds to a lot of confusion about what was fact and what was fiction. And so this spawns a bunch of authors trying to do that, separate the facts and the fictions, and TV shows and documentary films, and this whole controversial thing just kind of blows up. And it's really stems from him just mixing mixing the facts and the fiction. And one of the things he speculates in his book is that the Knights Templar were stationed on the Temple Mount because they were actually searching for a lost artifact. And in the book, he says that the artifact they were seeking was the Holy Grail, which he goes on to say which wasn't actually a chalice or a cup, but the holy bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And this is a pretty reasonable, logical kind of speculation to have, I suppose, that but it makes more sense to me that if the Knights Templar were actually looking for a lost artifact, they were probably more likely looking for the Ark of the Covenant, since the Temple Mount was where history lost track of that artifact. And so that's kind of where we kind of get to this whole thing with what I've got going on in DC and what I've discovered. That's kind of like the prologue to it all, because if you really research the Knights Templar and what really happened with them, it's a pretty interesting story. They were originally formed to protect the highways during the Crusades from the marauders and the thieves and stuff along the roads who would rob and kill the Christians that were traveling. And so that's the official reason they were formed, was to protect these roads and the Christians during their pilgrimage. And of course, there was a lot going on there with the Temple Mount. They were stationed right on the Temple Mount, and some say that they were digging on the foundation, searching for something, and then all of a sudden they stopped digging and went back. And everybody's seen this in the Da Vinci Code. And they rose to great wealth and power suddenly, and the king and the Pope worked together to arrest them all on the original Friday the 13th. And this basically ended the Knights Templar. Or did it? Could it be that maybe they just went underground and took their knowledge underground? And
Right.
so
You're breaking up again, Rob.
that's another Dan Brown novel. Now we're talking the Lost Symbol. And he goes into all the geometry and stuff. He doesn't really go into it, but he kind of alludes to this geometric code in Washington D.C. And when you really start looking at Washington D.C., there's a lot going on that you're going to immediately pick up on, like the Star of Washington D.C. It's located right there above the White House. It's basically an inverted pentagram pointed directly at the White House, and that's one that rings a lot of bells with conspiracy theorists. So, and then of course the other one is the infamous Masonic square and compass that resides just outside of the United States Capitol building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I've discovered in my own research and kind of exploring what the square and compass really symbolize and what it really could represent in Freemasonry. If you ask a Freemason what the symbol means, they'll likely give you a story, something to the effect of the square reminds them to keep their actions square and justice with their fellow man, and the compass reminds them to circumscribe their lives with the principles of Freemasonry, or you're going to get something to that effect. But when you really start exploring the true meaning of the square and compass, you'll find that they're really the two required drafting tools to solve the ancient mathematical riddle known as squaring the circle.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because squaring the circle, it basically it's impossible to actually do this task, but it is possible to get really close to it, and that's really all that you need to do in order to obtain perfect geometric proportions, like we find in Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian man drawing. And it goes back even further than that. It goes all the way back to the Great Pyramid of Giza, also its proportions are derived from squaring the circle. And both of these examples also, interestingly enough, are well renowned for their perfect proportions. So I find that very interesting as well. And it's all based on this mathematical riddle that really can't even be properly solved. It can only be kind of estimated or, approximated. And so, but yet you can still get these perfect geometric proportions. Well, what I've discovered about Washington, D.C. is really interesting, is that the Masonic square and compass that appears in the layout there, it's made up of Pennsylvania and Maryland avenues. You can actually use that compass, the spread of that compass, to scale the Vitruvian man drawing directly onto the map of Washington, D.C. in perfect harmonious proportions, and you begin to unlock a secret code. And when I say begin, there's a lot more to the code, but we'll get to that. But when you actually, when you measure the encompass length of 12th Street there between the spread of Pennsylvania and Maryland avenues, that measurement actually equals 1 cubit, or 1/4 of the Vitruvian man's height. And when you have him in his proper scale, you just got to put him on the map by taking the line above his head and dissecting Logan and DuPont circles there in the pentagram in Washington, D.C. There's those two circles. You just put that line right through the center of those two circles, and you center the drawing on 16th Street with the White House, and you've begun to unlock the code. And when you do this, you're going to notice a lot of interesting synchronicities. For starters, you'll notice that literally every single angled street in Washington, D.C. is now pointing directly to the key locations of his anatomy. You'll notice that his head and face and chest are all perfectly framed by the city streets. The angles of Pennsylvania and New York, I believe, New York avenues are perfectly mimicking the angles of his arms. He has ribs, a stomach. He's got arteries in his legs. The whole city is actually, it's been boggling people's minds for 200 years now, and it's really just based on the human anatomy. And it's to the point where the Vitruvian man even has his own chakra system. And this is represented by some of the most prominent buildings and landmarks in Washington, D.C. He's got the root chakra there, represented by the Jefferson Memorial. And then above that, you have the reproductive chakra there. It's no surprise there. That's actually represented by the Washington Monument. And then above that, I mean, if that's not a little innuendo there, above that we've got the Washington ellipse there, representing the navel chakra. Then above that we have the White House, representing the heart chakra. And then above that we have the throat chakra, conspicuously absent. And there's a reason for this, and it's because it's associated with the throat and communication. It's left out of the chakra system in order to maintain the secrecy of this whole secret code in Washington, D.C. Then above that, we have the third eye chakra, which is represented by Scott's circle, which is basically, it takes on the form of the Star of David. And so that's very interesting. And these are all like perfectly placed in the geometry of it. And then at the very top, most interesting of all, we have the national headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry there, the southern jurisdiction. We have the House of the Temple representing the crown chakra of the Vitruvian man there in Washington, D.C. So he's got this whole chakra system. And it's all based on the anatomy, and it's all perfectly proportioned with the Vitruvian man. And to the point where when you actually look at the Vitruvian man on the map, there's really no denying that this is how the city was designed. In fact, the circles and square that make up the pentagram above the White House come into perfect alignment with the lines in his arms and his shoulders and elbows. It's so precise, and the geometry. So I mean, you can't deny that. That's
Yeah.
it was laid out like this, with intentions. So what was the intention? I mean, obviously people have been wondering about this. They've been writing books, they've been writing stories, documentaries, trying to figure out this whole thing in DC. And if it's what's interesting is the Vitruvian man was actually created as an architectural template. It was designed as that. It was with that intent. People kind of look at it for its anatomy, but it's really an architectural drawing, and it was intended for that. And so there's all this controversy about DC and what does all these symbols mean and stuff. And if it's really just based on anatomy, if it's really just based on this architectural template created by Leonardo da Vinci, why not just come out and say, hey, guys, quit making up all this fuss, it's just based on this whole drawing with Leonardo da Vinci. It's based on this architectural principle first noted by Vitruvius in the 1st century. Why not? Because there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. I mean, if it were really that simple, they would just come out and say it, but there's more going on than that. If you take the same size square and circle as the Vitruvian man and use that to apply that to come up with the same proportions for the Great Pyramid, and then you lay the Great Pyramid into the diagram, just you got to lay it on there different. You just lay the top of the circle at the top of the Vitruvian's man's head instead of at its feet. Now, when you lay it out like that in the same scale, the same circle, same size square, in that manner, you're going to find some even more interesting synchronicities. For starters, you're going to notice that the Great Pyramid points directly to every single wound suffered by Christ during the crucifixion on the Vitruvian man.
Wow.
You'll notice that the missing capstone represents the crown of thorns, and it's perfectly framed right there at his temples. And you'll notice that the 4 vent shafts of the pyramid point to the 4 nail wounds, which are represented by the 4 stars: Sirius, Alnitak, Kochab, and Subin. And the stars are a whole thing in themselves. We'll get into that in a little bit, but for now we'll just kind of keep moving on. And of course, the roof of the king's chamber there, it points directly to where the spear wound pierced his ribs, which is in perfect alignment with the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Bridge there in Washington, D.C. So now we have the pyramid pointing to the wounds of Christ on the Vitruvian man, but it gets even more interesting when you look at the queen's chamber, and where it's resting is directly on his phallus, which is a direct, it's symbolic of sexual union, and that is another theme that is incredibly predominant in Washington, D.C. Right there also in the diagram, you'll notice that this also falls directly right by where the reproductive chakra, the Washington Monument, is. And what's even more interesting about that is that the Washington Monument is resting in pathways that make up 2 circles. It's known in geometry as a Vesica Pisces. And what's interesting about that is when you start researching that, you'll find that the Vesica Pisces is actually the geometric symbol for a woman's vagina. So not only do we have the Vitruvian man's phallus resting on the queen's chamber, but we also have the Washington Monument, a phallic symbol, which everybody's heard the jokes, about the Washington Monument, that we have this phallic symbol there resting inside a geometric symbol for a woman's vagina, and a pyramid pointing to the wounds of Christ. So now we're starting to paint a picture here, okay? And it only gets more interesting when you start exploring things like the vent shafts. Well, let's start with the Washington Monument and how it's a phallic symbol. This, to trace the roots of this, you go back to ancient Egypt, which is where the obelisk comes from.
Yeah.
And this is, it all stems from the ancient legend of Osiris and Isis. And basically, the legend is comes on a bunch of different texts in different forms. And it so there's really not one single account. They're all different, and they're all very different parts of the segment. But basically, there's an underlying theme to the whole myth. And basically, the legend is that Osiris was this great Egyptian leader, and he was murdered by his jealous brother Set. And Set cut his body up into several pieces. And in fact, some people even say 14 pieces. And if you count the sections of the Vitruvian man's body, you'll get 14, which is interesting. But anyway, he cut his body up and spread the body parts throughout the land of Egypt. And he took his phallus and he threw that in the sea, and it was eaten by a fish. Well, along came his sister bride, and she managed to retrieve the remaining body parts and resurrect Osiris, but he no longer had his phallus. So she fashioned him a new one out of pure gold. And with the golden phallus, the two immaculately conceived their miracle godchild, Horus. Now, this is probably the most popular myth in ancient Egypt, and it's definitely been spread. It's carried over into numerous other doctrines, including Christianity. A lot of the elements of the story are carried over. You got the resurrection, the Immaculate Conception, wrestling with gods, all these different themes that kind of carry over into other traditions, and that's actually where the links or the connection to the phallic symbolism of an obelisk truly comes from. It's the golden phallus of Osiris. Well, when you start researching vent shafts of the Great Pyramid and you look at the southern vent shafts, they point to two stars. You've got Alnitak there, which is one of the three stars in Orion's belt, and then you have Sirius. Well, when you start researching what some of these stars represent, you'll find actually that Osiris,
Oh, hold on.
or the constellation Orion is actually a representation of Osiris, because when she resurrects as the constellation of Orion, you have the pyramid pointing to one star there in his belt, which is representing Osiris. The other star points to Sirius, which, if you do your research there, you'll find that is a representation of Isis. So interestingly enough, we have these southern vent shafts pointing to Egyptian god and goddess there. And of course, they had their miracle godchild Horus. Well, on the opposing, the northern vent shafts there, you point to two other stars. You've got Kochab and Thuban. And now, Kochab literally means waiting him who cometh. And now, Thuban, which is in Alpha Draconis, means the head of the serpent. Okay, so this is an interesting pair of stars to have paired together here. You got waiting him who cometh, which seems to me it could be a representation of, like the Antichrist, if you will, while you have the other star pointing to the head of the serpent, which, there's obvious representation there of Satan. And if there's any doubt of that, just look in the diagram just under his hand there in Washington, D.C. If you put all this together and you look at the diagram just under his hand there where these two stars are, you're going to find the number 666 right there encoded in the landscape of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Now,
And that brings us kind of, in the fields of occult magic stuff, and that's what I
sure.
want to get into a little bit now. You
And
say in your
that's
videos,
kind of where it leads.
right?
Go ahead, sorry.
You say in your videos, that if you look just from above onto the map of Washington D.C., and then you get these lines and you follow that and you see all these symbols, it almost looks, or it really is, a sigil, a magical sigil
Well,
of some sort.
that's where it really does get interesting, because when you actually, well, see, years ago I was in a metal band, and we were,
Yeah.
long before I was ever even looking into this stuff and researching this stuff, I was in a metal band, and we were trying to come up with a name, and my buddy suggested we call ourselves Sigil and D. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And he kind of shows me this occult symbol, and it's basically a 5-pointed heptagram inside a 7-pointed, or a 5-pointed pentagram inside a 7-pointed heptagram, and it's got all these different weird like little syllables or names of God. And basically what it is it's a codex for decoding or translating the names of God and the archangels, and that was its intent. It was designed by a 16th century astrologer and magician named John Dee.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in the court of Queen Elizabeth II, was it?
First.
First. Yes, and so basically, I stumbled across this symbol, and we actually liked it, and we took it on as a band name. And what's interesting is, years later, I'm no longer in the band or anything, but I'm, researching all this stuff, and I'm looking at the diagram I created with the Vitruvian Man and the Great Pyramid on Washington, D.C., and I kind of looked at it and next to the Sigil and D, and I start, looking, and I'm starting thinking maybe these two are linked. And what's interesting is you actually lay the Sigil and D amulet, which is in fact it's a magic circle. If you lay it right there on the Vitruvian Man circle, the same size, same circumference, whatever, and you lay that circle on there, you get some even more interesting synchronistic geometry. The 3 of the 7 points of the heptagram are perfectly angled to mimic the Great Pyramid. The other 4 points are perfectly, well, not exactly perfect, because the Vitruvian Man's kind of in a weird little position there, but they're nicely marking his hands and his feet. And so there's a lot of interesting synchronistic geometry there too. And like I said, the Sigil and D is literally a magic circle. And if you start to look at what magic circles are, there are certain characteristics that come with a magic circle or sigil magic that are quite prominent in Washington, D.C. Some of the main characteristics, every magic circle is different, every sigil is different, but there are certain recurring themes that come with these magic circles. And some of them are, like, for example, the circle needs to be traced 3 times. The cardinal directions need to be prominently marked. The elements are usually heavily involved. There's often the reciting of an incantation, often involving the names of angelic beings. And you're going to find that when you put these 3 diagrams together in Washington, D.C., they all bear a number of interesting synchronicities with this whole magic circles. For starters, like I said, you've got the circle traced 3 times. You've got the Vitruvian Man circle, you've got the Great Pyramid circle, and you've got the Sigil and D Amos circle. So there you have 3 circles traced out. You've got your cardinal directions marked out, with the White House being the Jefferson Memorial being the south, the Capitol building being the east, and the Lincoln Memorial being the west. In the middle there is your compass needle, the Washington Monument. You often have the use of the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Well, when you get into the aspects of the sacred geometry of Washington, D.C., you'll find that also in this template are Metatron's cube, the flower of life, all these different elements of sacred geometry. And when you really explore the root of sacred geometry, you're going to find what all of the symbols of sacred geometry that are derived from the flower of life they're all really representing the Platonic solids, which are all symbolic of your elements. So right there in Washington, D.C., you have your elements. And you have often you have the reciting of incantations, often involving the names of angelic beings. Well, that's exactly what the Sigil and D is designed to do, is to translate the names of these angelic beings. So, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, and you're going to find that these are all real characteristics of a magic circle or sigil magic. And what you're also going to find is often the magic circle is designed with the intent to symbolically depict the magician's desired outcome.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
What's most interesting of all that I think about the whole code that we look at here is each time you add a new layer, it symbolically represents something. It visually represents something. Like when you lay out the Vitruvian man there on the Great Pyramid, it's not only pointing to the wounds of Christ, it's not only, depicting that, but it literally visually looks like Jesus on and ascending from the cross.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you lay the Sigillum D on the image, it literally is restoring. I mean, visually, it's restoring the pyramid. At the same time, it's simultaneously placing a crown on the Vitruvian man's head.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
And that's the most interesting part of the whole thing, is that not only is all of this, it's saying it with symbolism, but it's visually putting a picture there that echoes the same thing that the symbolism is saying. And that's when you really start thinking, where is the real source? Is this really from minor death experience, or could this be from,
Right.
perhaps the source of all sources?
Yeah.
I mean,
When you said
that's the
Jesus,
language.
yeah, when you just said Jesus, it just came to me that before we're talking about the Vesica Pisces there, and the Vesica Pisces also makes the fish, which is also the
Sure,
symbol
it's
of
a
Jesus.
prominent
Yeah.
symbol in free, and it's prominent in Christianity. Yes, it made the fish. Not only that, but very often you'll find in old artworks, you'll find Jesus depicted within a Vesica Pisces,
Right.
because the Vesica Pisces literally represents a gateway between worlds,
Yep.
and which
The
is
womb.
also kind of where the symbolism of the whole the vagina comes from, because it actually comes from the 6 days of creation and sacred geometry, which if you go through my book, you're going to find, that's the thing about the book, is you're going to find all of these different things explained. The book isn't just about sacred geometry, it's about astrology, it's about architecture, it's about history. It's kind of your one-stop shop for all of the different angles of this multifaceted mystery that is Washington, D.C. And
Right. It's
that's
really kind of an
the
advanced
sacred
chapter
geometry.
of syncretism if you go and look at a city like that and you see all these things combined into
Sure.
one, all these angles of looking at
And
it. And as you
and
said,
see,
there's much more to it. Yeah. Go ahead.
that's the part that gets most people with the mystery, is they kind of look at it and like they see this pentagram in Washington, D.C., and it's inverted, and so automatically it's Satanism. And when you actually look at the pentagram, long before it was associated with Satanism, it was a Christian symbol. And long before that, it was a Pythagorean symbol, which represented the elements, the 4 elements, and the 5th element, which when you really start looking at the thing about Freemasonry, is they like symbolism for a reason, and the reason is because with every symbol used in Freemasonry, there are multiple meanings and interpretations, and in that, it's kind of like the Dan Brown mixing fact and fiction. It creates a lot of confusion. The key to actually solving the mystery is when you take all of these symbols combined and find the common denominator between them. That's how you solve the mystery, because they've all got multiple meanings. You can't just look at the pentagram and say
Right.
automatically say it's Satanism.
And also looking at the place or whatever person or being, what is the purpose for it? What is the outcome? What is the actual reality when you go into Washington D.C.? What is happening there? Like who resides there? What's going on? And I think I just want to put.
Interestingly enough, I believe that Washington. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to put
Anyway.
an effort on the intent, that this magic
Well,
comes with.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is I think Washington, D.C. itself is no different than any other symbol in Freemasonry. I believe, much like all the symbols, it has many meanings, many interpretations, and many purposes. And that's where it really, I mean, it's almost, as far as my investigations have gone so far, it's leading me to believe that it's almost infinite, the different layers and depths of knowledge to be uncovered and explored in this.
Right,
Because
right.
I'm still even having so there are multiple meanings, multiple interpretations. There's really no one end game. There's just all these different things, and I guess the real trick is, you got to kind of put everything together. And it's kind of what I'm kind of trying to do with the book, is I kind of try and leave it open for the reader to interpret for them. I don't want to give you the answer. I don't want to tell you the answer. I want to give you the answer and let you. I want to put the answer there for you to find, if you catch my drift there. I don't want to just so. It's one of the things I do in the book is I just put all the information there for you to make your own educated conclusion rather than to make your conclusion for you. And so with that, I really don't want to say that there's one true answer to what Washington D.C. is. All I can say is that there are multiple
Levels of understanding it. Yeah.
interpretations. Yes, yes.
This is
And
just
so
like squaring a circle, you know, that comes out to pi, and that's an infinite number. So the
sure.
riddle may never be, it may be built for the purpose that the riddle may never be solved, you know.
Well, I believe it is solved in that it is solved in that the thing is I just can't give you the answer. It's something you really have to discover yourself. The answer is there, and
Got
it's
it.
there in the symbols that I put there. It's just something I can't give you. It's something you have to discover for yourself. But
Mm,
I can guide you, and I can give you all the tools necessary, and that's
right.
what the book is really trying to do.
Yeah, good.
And
We'll
when you really
we'll not poke longer for the conclusion here, but let's get into detail of some things. There's a few questions that we have. Let's start with the significance of the sign of Virgo. There's
sure,
a
well,
specific part.
I think one of the things, like when you look at what this sure Virgo is you have that Virgo reflected as all over the city. The city, it's one of the themes you're going to notice first before we even get into the Virgo. We should probably just kind of get into the alchemical wedding and what that is representing. You're going to find throughout the city a recurring theme of this alchemical wedding of the philosophical male and female figures, and you're going to find it all over. You're going to find it like a good example is the James Buchanan Monument, who was the 15th president of the United States. And you'll find his monument there. He's centered in this monument, and on each side he's bookended by the allegorical male and female. And this is all really representing the trinity there of the male, the female, and the offspring. And you find that reflection in numerous buildings. You'll find it like in the Supreme Court. You'll find it there with I believe it's Liberty there and the pediment, and on the ground she's flanked by two once again the allegorical male and female. And you'll find that also at the National Archives building. You'll find it in the best example you're going to find it in is the Boy Scouts National Memorial, or the memorial there. And basically there you have this Boy Scout poised in mid-stride carrying a walking stick, and there he's flanked by Mom and Pop, except for Mom and Pop don't look like your normal Mom and Pop. There's a lot of esoteric symbolism going on with this, and it's all designed really to reflect this alchemical wedding of the male and the female, and the idea of the union of the two. And what this is really reflected here in well, if you're familiar with David Oveson, who wrote The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, The Masons and the Building of Washington D.C., I believe is the title. If you read there, he makes countless connections with the constellation Virgo. For starters, he notes numerous zodiacs throughout Washington, D.C., in various buildings and artworks and whatnot that all seem to be aligned and resonate with Virgo. He's also noted in his book that almost all of the cornerstone ceremonies, which were laid by Masons, almost all of these cornerstone ceremonies for all the most important buildings were laid while the sun was in alignment with Virgo.
mm.
And
That's a
you'll
curious fact. Why would you do that?
well, there's a belief, an ancient belief that when it all really stems from the ancient philosopher Hermes Trismegistus, which means thrice great. He was this great ancient philosopher who basically he's synonymous with Enoch, and he taught men the art of building cities, and he basically gave us tons of knowledge. He's also known as Thoth or Thoth or whatever, and so he had this concept of as above, so below, and this is kind of where this belief kind of stems, that when you build your monument, your city, your cathedral, your whatever in alignment with stars, each star has a certain association, like I was saying how the Orion is associated with Osiris, while Isis is associated with Isis. Well, there's an ancient belief that when you would build your building or your structure in alignment with a particular star, if that star represented Venus, then you would channel the energies of Venus into your structure. And that's kind of the concept. It's basically as above, so below.
Mm.
It's that
And
sort of a concept. And you find that concept as well with like the reflecting pools.
right, and
Go ahead.
Virgo is also
Do you have something to chime in there?
the Virgin Mary, right? And we find
Sure.
we
She
the theme of
exactly. She's
Mary
just
is all around. I mean, we have Maryland right there.
sure. Sure, it's between Virginia and Maryland, which is to say it's
Yeah,
between Virgin and
Yeah.
Mary.
which is
Yeah,
incredibly
it's all
right in your
it's all
face.
the same. It's all to represent the Virgin carries many different. Uh, it's kind of like just like Hermes. You know, he can be Hermes to this culture. He can be Thoth to this culture.
Mm.
Enoch to this culture, but it's all the same energies, and it's the same way with the Virgin Mary or Virgo or exactly. And so you've got all these things align, like especially the most interesting part is the federal triangle itself, which is represented basically the federal triangle is made up of 3 points. You've got the White House there, you've got the Washington Monument, and you've got the Capitol building. 3 points make up what is known in geometry as a right triangle. Well, also making up a right triangle is the 3 brightest stars of the constellation Virgo. So Washington, D.C. there with the federal triangle is designed to reflect the constellation Virgo right there in the streets with with this right triangle. Well, when you get into the Freemasonry aspects of this, when you start the right triangle, it's a prominent symbol in Freemasonry. And when you look at its real meaning, what it really represents is these 3 sides of this triangle represent the philosophical male, female, and the divine offspring again. And so all of this energy that you got focused on the Virgin Goddess is really only one part of this Pythagorean theorem or this equation here. And there's still 2 other parts. And what it's really all boiling down to is the male and the female. And when you start to look at that, that starts to bring you into alchemy and how that plays out, because what the male and the females are really symbolic of are the male and female energies of the human body, which is all right there in the anatomy. And that's kind of where what DC is really trying to explain to you is anatomy and how the energy system of the body really works. And so you've got these chakras, and they're basically your energy channels. And you've got these serpents. If you look at like the modern day medical staff, you'll see the caduceus is what it's based on the staff of Hermes. It's really, the staff is symbolic of the spine, while these 2 serpents are symbolic of the male and female energies that wind up the spine, charging these chakras of the human anatomy and making their way up to the 3rd eye chakra and charging that to connect you to the pure consciousness, which, interestingly enough, when you look at Washington, D.C., and you want to talk about a magician's desired outcome, the recurring theme you see there when you put the Washington, D.C. with the Great Pyramid and the Vitruvian Man, the recurring theme you see there is not the activation of these chakras, but it's more the severing of the chakras.
Mm.
If you look, the pyramid, the missing capstones, obviously it's missing. This is, this is representing our pure consciousness in Washington, D.C. is represented by something that's missing, okay? If that's not clue enough, what is the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C.? What it actually is a crypt. That's where they keep Albert Pike's body, okay? He's their revered philosopher who wrote Morals and Dogma, which was the handbook once given to all new initiates of the Scottish Rite Freemasons. Excuse me. And so you've got the crown's chakra here in this diagram is represented by the capstone, which is missing, and a crypt, which the House of the Temple, not only that, is actually designed on an older crypt. It's basically based on the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, or the tomb of Mausoleus at Halicarnassus, which is one of the original 7 wonders of the world, and it too was a crypt. So we've got a missing artifact and a crypt representing the crown consciousness of the Vitruvian, or if you want to look at it a little deeper, of humanity, maybe a little deeper, and it's representing the pure consciousness of you. And so there's a recurring theme of this severing, and that's where we kind of get back to it's all anatomy, and it's all there in your anatomy. What it really is all these symbols you're going to see. It really is the missing link, if you will, of religion. You see, all the different religions of the world, I like to equate it like this. Looking at the different religions of the world are like looking at the fragmented blueprints, the fragmented 2-dimensional blueprints of a 3-dimensional structure. That is to say that each religion kind of seemed to get their own missing little fragment of this blueprint, and they're looking at it from this one-sided perspective. They're trying to look at a 3-dimensional structure from 2 dimensions, and it's just not working. And really, to understand the true dimensions of that architectural structure, you really got to see all the different blueprints, and that's kind of the key. And when you start looking at all the different religions of the world, you're going to see recurring themes, and all these different themes are really encoding the secrets of pure consciousness, which is all hidden in your body. See, there's a reason that Jesus spoke in parables, and it's quite simply because if he had just spoken his teachings outright, the powers that be would have never let it be. He had to actually hide them in parables to get them under the noses of the powers that be, to give you the true secrets. He wasn't. What you read in the Bible and what you learn in church is not what the real story of all that really is. Jesus is that they've changed his story, and when you actually start looking at what he was really preaching, like Matthew 6:22, the light of the body is the eye. If thine eye be single, thy whole body will be full of light. He's talking about your third eye and how that's your real. And he's trying to teach you that, but he couldn't just do it outright because they would have never let him. In fact, that's why they killed him. But his story's been changed, it's been twisted, and it's been altered to suit their needs, and they're not really giving you the real secrets of what. But when you actually look at all the different religions, you'll find these same. It's kind of like decoding the mystery of DC. When you look at everything, what's the common denominator? You're going to find common denominators in religion as well. And it's all like the tree of life, it's a recurring theme. The serpent's a recurring theme, and these are all representing the same thing, whether you're talking the ancient Aztecs or the ancient Romans. The serpent is representing that male-female energy, and that's why you find this androgyny in all these different ancient religions. And it's all because all these ancient religions really stem from the one source knowledge, but it's been fragmented because of separation in cultures, and whatever happened in our cataclysmic past that forced us to forget about whatever it was that happened for the last 200,000 years of existence on this planet.
Yeah. Maybe we can go a little bit into the resemblance of how the city is laid out and what's been built to Egyptian. The obelisk is Egyptian.
Sure.
It looks like it's between 2 rivers or parts of a river.
Sure. There's just there's a lot of links to Egypt because I think these links are really trying to tell you the truth that Jesus is really a synchronistic echo of Horus. When you look at the story of Jesus, the story that you're given anyway by the Council of Nicaea from 500 AD, who basically gave you at least the predecessor of what we have as the modern Bible today. When you start to look, you'll see that. I thought, where was I going with that? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But
That's right. That's right. It's just a multitude. Aren't there even Egyptian symbols on the obelisk itself? Symbolism?
sure. Not in Washington D.C. There's not,
Hmm.
but there's often a lot of. That's where I was going with that. The connections between Washington D.C. and Egypt. I think what they're really relating all these Egyptian symbols with Washington D.C. because they're really trying to tell you the truth that Jesus was really all that you're getting from the Bible is based on this ancient Egyptian myth from Horus, who was the sun god,
Yeah.
or Ra, the god of the sun. And you look at Jesus, and he was the sun god. There, and of course, Zeitgeist did a lot of. The movie Zeitgeist is very popular, and they did a lot to expose the truth. But then again, there were also a lot of people who claim they debunked certain things, and there were definitely certain inaccuracies about that movie. But at the same time, there were a lot of truth, and the trolls wanted to just focus on the inaccuracies and never mind the truth. And of course, that's their job. But there's a lot of truth to that as well, and the truth is much of Christianity is taken from paganism. Much of the Jesus story itself is taken right from Horus.
Yeah.
And when you start researching things like the Christmas tree, you'll find it was a pagan symbol. You'll find that the pentagram was a pagan symbol. You'll find all of Christianity was
Yeah.
pretty much borrowed.
Even the
And
fish
that's not to
symbol
say there's
from.
not truth,
Yeah.
because Jesus really was a real prophet. He was not the Son of God. Yes, he was the Son of God, but you know what else? We all are the Son of God. And that's what he was trying to teach you. And that's why he taught it in parables, because he couldn't just say it, because they want you to believe that your salvation rests in somebody else's hands. Because when you believe your salvation rests in somebody else's hands, you're helpless to do anything about it yourself. And if you knew the truth, that salvation rested in yourself, salvation lies within, you could actually do something about your problems. And they don't want you, because they want to control you through your problems. And that's kind of the end game of that whole thing. But that's why you're going to find these synchronicities, or these resonations, whatever you want to call it, these parallels with Egypt there in Washington, D.C., is because I believe what they're really doing is they're encoding the truth about, all of the religion, really. I mean, all of the beliefs that Freemasons truly are keepers of knowledge. And it's really, Washington, D.C. is brilliantly masterminded, full of, encoded with this knowledge on so many different levels, and there's so many different levels to explore. But when it really gets down to it, we're touching on the roots of religion. We're touching on so
Yeah.
much more than just
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., occult magic, and other things. And I believe that this is all elemental as well, because part of severing that connection there is, they obviously have to know how that connection works in order to sever it. And at the same time, they need to keep you from knowing it. And so there again, it's kind of perhaps this is all encoded in there just to keep you believing the falsehoods. Every time you celebrate Christmas, you're really celebrating the birth of Horus. If you look at that right there at the solstice every year, you'll find an interesting alignment that occurs right there with the three belt stars of Osiris there, or Orion, if you will, pointing directly to Isis there, or Sirius. These lines right there on the solstice of winter every year, which is Christmas time, they point directly to where the sun, Horus, or the Son of God, the Son of Man, the sun, emerges on the horizon at dawn. The horizon, the Horus, horizon comes from the word Horus. Sunset comes from the word set. It's all even there in our mythology, and so the truths are there for those who have the eyes to see. The trick is most people's eyes have been severed.
Right.
And so I think that's the most important thing. And like I said, I don't want to draw any conclusions for everyone. I want to just put the information out there, and you can draw your own conclusions.
Right. So that's what we're going to have to do. This is by understanding this magic that you can, then protect yourself from it happening to you. We see that in not only Washington D.C. but all of official
Is what it
buildings.
really is. It's not even magic. Most magic is illusion. When you go to an
Right.
illusionist, when you go to a magic show,
Or
what
blinded.
happens when you see the magician saw his magician in half? You're like, wow, that's impressive. I mean, it's a trick. You know it's a trick, but you don't know how it's done, and you're marveled and you're amazed by it. And then when you actually learn the secrets of how the trick is performed, it loses its effect. When
Yeah.
then he performs it, and it doesn't have the
And a
same effect
magician
anymore.
loses his power,
And
right? And there's
exactly.
some things that we can find in Washington D.C. that resemble, the manege of a circus, or like the magic's the magician's lair or whatever.
Well,
The
the
use
thing
of
is,
the use,
you're not going to find random stuff that doesn't have any meaning. That's the thing, is when you find something in
right?
there in Washington D.C., it's going to be related to almost every time. It's going to be at its deepest level. You're going to find a spiritual meaning of what's really going on there.
And I was
Not
gonna go
religious,
deeper
but
with one
spiritual.
thing, which is
Sure.
the use of water here. We know that there's a lot of reflection going on the water. Some the water,
Sure.
especially at night.
That's the
And here's is
the
the
reflecting
magical
pools.
part
Yes.
again. It's actually a mirror. Well, can you
Sure.
tell
It's
us
as
about that?
above, so below. That's the reflecting pools are they're based on the philosophical principle of Hermes Trismegistus, which is that is which is above corresponds with that is which is below, and that which is below corresponds to that which is above, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. And basically, it's a philosophical concept to demonstrate the macrocosm and the microcosm. And that's what I believe the Bible really is a guidebook on how these two are interrelated. And if I may elaborate, the macrocosm is the universe, the cosmos, the heavens, however you want to address it, while the microcosm is you, or the human body. And the Bible is really uh, a guidebook on how these, on how to, work your microcosm with your macrocosm. I guess I don't know how better to describe it than that, but
Yeah.
that's really, the reflecting pools are a demonstration of that, and that philosophical principle, just as you find there in the Federal Triangle in Washington D.C. You have it's representing the microcosm there in Washington D.C. of the macrocosm of the constellation Virgo. And what's interesting about that is there's even another interesting little macrocosm microcosm theme going on in Washington D.C., where, as you see there, the Vitruvian Man laid out on Washington D.C., you find some interesting synchronicities. Well, if you lay the Vitruvian Man out on the White House, you get the same interesting synchronicities. It conforms to the anatomy of the Vitruvian Man, the White House, literally. And again, you have the microcosm and the macrocosm. If you actually look at the third floor of the White House there, which is the family's floor, and you have the three main bedrooms on that floor. You have the president's bedroom, you have the Lincoln's bedroom, and then across the hall from that, you have the Queen's bedroom. Well, if you take the center points of each of these bedrooms, you're going to get a perfect reflection of that Pythagorean triangle of the Federal Triangle, which once again represents the male, the female, and their offspring. And now we have it represented in a very masculine bedroom, the Lincoln bedroom, the very feminine bedroom, the Queen's bedroom, and the President's bedroom, which represents the offspring. And so, again, it's representing the macrocosm to the microcosm. This is the White House we're talking about. This is the heart chakra. And so there you have the macrocosm and the microcosm. And it's right there reflected in the White House. And what's really interesting about the way the White House is laid out is when you lay the Vitruvian Man there on the first floor, his head is perfectly framed by the oval-shaped diplomatic reception room. And his body's laid out and his arms are all sectioned according to the rooms and whatnot. And what's interesting is between that diplomatic reception room and the top floor there, up there on the top floor, you have the solarium, which is basically a room for the sun. Okay, so now we've got a room there dedicated to the sun at the top floor above his head. In between these two floors are two floors that have color-coded rooms. And these, you have the blue room, the yellow room, the red room, and the green room. And what's interesting about these rooms is they're placed right between the Vitruvian Man's head and the sun. And what's interesting about these rooms, when you actually look and see what the four colors actually represent, the only thing you're going to find that these four colors are all collectively involved in again, we're looking for the common denominator here. The common denominator here is something called opponent process theory, which is basically, it has to do with the way we perceive color. Try to imagine a reddish green, if you will. Not brown like you would actually get if you mix the two pigments together, but something with that actually has the hue of red and something that has the hue of green at the same time. And you can't do this. And it's the same with blue and yellow. And these are red, green, and blue, yellow are known as the forbidden colors. And basically, it all has to do with the way we perceive color. Basically, there's cells in your retinas called opponent neurons, and they fire when they get real stimulated when incoming red light comes in, and the cells get really active, and it tells our brain we're seeing red. Well, those very same cells, they dampen when we see green, and that tells our brain we're seeing something green. So basically, how these nerves react tell us what color we're seeing between red and green. And then there's another set of neurons that do the same thing with blue and yellow. So we can never perceive these two colors coming from the same place at the same time. And so basically, it all boils down to two colors opposing each other. Well, four colors. You've got red opposing green, and you've got blue opposing yellow. And we find this configuration perfectly depicted in the White House. And this is to create the forbidden colors, or to basically put a blinder between the head of the Vitruvian man and the sun, or the solarium. And so there's an interesting code going right on there in Washington, D.C. that involves the Vitruvian man, the color-coded rooms there, and of course the solarium. And it, again, that's the macrocosm. Again, it's the Vitruvian man on the White House, and you can put the Vitruvian man on Washington, D.C. Again, it's the macrocosm, microcosm. Same with the Federal Triangle, the Pythagorean triangle there between the bedrooms in the White House. It's all designed to reflect the cosmos and the body. It's basically designed to reflect human as a whole, and I believe that's kind of what they're getting at with this part of it, is basically to say, to put this blinder between humanity and from receiving the light. And so it's symbolic right there in the White House. In fact, if you lay the Vitruvian man there on the White House on the first floor, it almost looks like he has sun rays around his head, even to the point, and again, now Bible and how many different quotes there are that reference face shining floor on this. It definitely gets overwhelming. And are you still with me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were
Okay.
gone for a second, but
No, go ahead. I was going to say, I think we're really starting to get right down to the nitty gritty of it all. And
yeah.
getting right down to the real guts of the core of the matter here.
Yeah, another thing that I noticed, I don't know if you talked about it, when I just looked at some of the older maps, you can just type into Google, Washington DC old map, and you find all these different old maps. You feature some in your videos and whatnot.
Yep.
You see the grid and how it's laid out, and you learn that and it was done after plans of Paris, London, Rome, and whatnot. If you look at these cities, if you look
Sure.
at Paris, have the name of Isis in there. You have Notre Dame. It's all always to this what you just have laid out to honor the goddess, the feminine.
We'll see. And that's definitely, there's one thing we do got to get into, so remind me before we do close out to go into Apotheosis as well. But yes, Paris was definitely one of the major influences for the city. That came, I think, as much from Jefferson as it did from Enfant, the architect. But Paris was definitely. You actually look. I don't know who it was that actually uncovered it. I know it's in Scott Onstott's film, but find that Paris well is based on the. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Do you hear us?
But yep.
Awesome.
Are we good to go? All right.
Yep, good to go.
So anyway, obviously there's more to this story with the Knights Templar than they're telling us. And when you actually look at what they could have been looking for on that Temple Mount, and what they might have actually found, well, when you actually look at the proportions of the Temple Mount, you'll find right in there. And I realized that the temple, the Solomon's Temple, was designed thousands of years before Vitruvian Man was even created. But lo and behold, you put the two together, and the proportions of the Vitruvian Man perfectly conform with the proportions of the Solomon's Temple. And what do you have there at the top, at the crown chakra? I mean, once again, the Solomon's Temple has its own chakra system as well, all the way up his body. And what do you have at the top there? The Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. And now, we kind of got into it earlier about how the mausoleum there in Washington, D.C., it's representing a crypt there with the House of the Temple. And of course, that's representing pure consciousness for humanity. We also have the missing capstone representing pure consciousness, which is missing. Well, now we have the Holy of Holies, or the Ark of the Covenant, which is also missing, representing pure consciousness. So there's a recurring theme here of missing pure consciousness.
Mm.
And that's where it really gets. Okay, you talk about the spells, and I don't
Right.
necessarily want to say that there's a spell in Washington, D.C., but there's a spell in Washington, D.C.
Well, it sounds to
But
me
beyond that, there's something much deeper than the spell. And what that is the secrets of pure consciousness. And it's all through the chakra system. And basically, it's the true teachings, the original teachings that Jesus was actually teaching. And that's what you're going to find truly when you really dig to the deepest depths of the rabbit hole of Washington, D.C. That's what you're going to find. That's the secrets that Freemasonry is truly guarding in this.
And it sounds to me that, with the possibility of laying it out, squaring the circle and getting into infinite waters, if you want, that there are just endless possibilities on how to use this sigil, for whoever gets the in power, or whoever does whatever with it can just add to it. One thing that I noticed when I zoom out on the let me just make this point.
Yeah.
One thing when I zoomed out a little bit on the map is there's not only the squares going on, there's also, it looks like diamonds. It's like almost a diamond matrix.
Sure.
And if you look up what a diamond matrix is, it's the glue that holds together the diamond structure with this, which is very, very strong, holding together. As we know, it's a very hard
Yeah, and also reflecting the same.
and reflecting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's now we're touching into the elements and the sacred geometry and how all of that works. Yes, it's basically the ad quadratum design. You're going to find it as well in like the House of the Temple and all that. It's all by the square. And I was watching a video the other day. Someone made a video about my work, and that was kind of weird in itself. But I'm watching this video, and she kind of pointed out a couple of things that I never even thought about, and how she kind of put it in her own terms, and what she believes in, that the straight lines are kind of man's way of breaking up nature, if you will. Nature likes to draw in circles or smooth curves, and man
Right.
likes to break it up with straight lines.
The direction, yeah.
I wonder if that might have something to do with it as well, and so, there's a lot of definitely a lot of more room for further exploration in this, but for the most part, I think the basics are pretty well covered. With as far as all the geometry and
it boils down to being sex magic, like so many things that we find around us.
Sure.
It just pertains to what whoever is using the tool and makes it an instrument, and uses it with that intent, I guess.
It's funny you had mentioned earlier about how they can add to it at any time and stuff like that. Well, a couple of interesting things, like the Vesica Pisces that surrounds the Washington Monument. That's actually a relatively new addition to Washington, D.C. think it like right around 2005 that was installed. It used to be just plain circular pathway. Then all of a sudden they decided to put a big symbol for a vagina there for some reason, whatever reason. Before that it was a circle. Another thing I noticed is when I made my film, obviously there's a picture of it, and you can see the 666 there in the film that's just underneath the Vitruvian man's hand. Well, since I made that film, I've noticed that they're restructuring that area now. I don't know if my film has anything to do with it, or if they just decided to maybe hide it a little better or what, but they're definitely making some alterations to that location there in Washington, D.C. now. So it is something that they can change, they can add to it, they can manipulate it as well. I mean, it's the whole point of creating a magic circle is it provides a sacred place, a place of protection, a place to do your magic.
Yeah,
And
right.
you
Infinite
got your
playground.
broken. Sure, and of course we could touch into the aspects of having a broken pentagram in your magic circle and what that really represents. But I think people kind of, for the most part, can kind of figure that one out. And if they haven't, I think it's pretty well been covered by other people. But the broken spell or the broken star is literally that's not something that's a way for the demons to pass through, if you will, in magic, is to have your spell or your star broken so that there's an opening for the demon or the entity, if you will, to travel through.
And that's just another
And so,
aspect to the magic, the whole demon thing, which
sure,
means nothing else from the moon, and the moon energy is all around with Isis and Mary and whatnot, the feminine, that is the moon energy. We have the moon energy also in the mirrors. How do you make a mirror? You put silver behind it. Well, silver is the color for the moon, or you put
sure.
mercury behind it, which is also called quicksilver. So this works out in whichever direction you go. Magically, it seems to be infinite. That is my
Sure.
addition to the brain, that this is really infinite today.
And I think one of the greatest secrets of all, it's kind of like, I feel like Washington, D.C. is kind of, they kind of are emulating, or I don't know, kind of reflecting the same thing that you find in the Vatican. If you look closely at the Vatican, you're going to find it's something interesting as well going on with the hieroglyph for Sirius. And the hieroglyph for Sirius, you have three symbols. You have a elongated triangle, which is basically an obelisk. You have a five-pointed star, and you have a semicircle or a dome. And you have these three things prominently reflected there in the Pythagorean triangle of Washington, D.C. You got an obelisk, you got your five-pointed star, and you've got a dome. And that's literally the hieroglyph for Sirius, which I believe is really kind of the same thing as the Pythagorean theorem and what it really represents, the male, the female, and the offspring. And so you find the same themes there at the Vatican as well. You've got an obelisk there now. The United States is a country that we made it a point to keep the separation between church and state. Why does the Vatican? I mean, it's still hard to explain why we have an obelisk in our nation's capital. Why do we don't have ties to ancient Egypt? Why do we have this symbol here? It's hard enough for us to explain. Why does the Christian capital of the world have an obelisk, which is a symbol of Osiris? I mean, it literally, you look up the meaning in the Masonic dictionary, and it's going to tell you it literally represents the shaft of Baal, or Baal's sexual reproductive organ. It literally represents that. So why there? And of course, they got their dome and all this. And when you look around the Vatican, you're going to find the same secrets hidden in plain sight. Like everyone talks about the pine cone there, and the pine cone statue. That's symbolic of your pineal gland. If you look at the creation of Adam right there on top of the Sistine Chapel there, the famous Michelangelo drawing. If you really look at the drawing, the portal, the cloud, or whatever it is that God's coming to, is really a depiction of your brain. And when you get to Washington, D.C., what do we have under our dome there in Washington, D.C.? And if you haven't figured it out yet, that dome is also symbolic of your brain or your head, a human head. That's what the dome of the Capitol building represents. What do you have underneath there? You have a painting called the Apotheosis of Washington. And this is literally, it covers the whole ceiling of that dome, and it's a depiction of George Washington being exalted in the heavens amongst the pantheon of mythological gods and goddesses. And basically, an apotheosis is an ascension to godhood, and that's literally exactly what it's depicting there in Washington, D.C. And the allegory there, the hidden message in plain sight, is that the apotheosis occurs under the dome. In other words, the apotheosis, your ascension to godhood, occurs within your own mind, within your own head, and it's through the pineal gland, the pine cone. And that's what my book's really about. When you look at it, you're going to find all these connections between everything from not just Washington, D.C., but the Vatican and certain religious symbols and just history. And what it's really all boiling down to is they've severed our connections, and they're keeping it for themselves because we're controllable that way. Again, it's about taking your salvation out of your own hands and putting it into an allegory.
Yeah.
That's where the star waiting him who cometh comes from. The idea behind that is to forever keep you awaiting the Antichrist, so that you don't realize the Antichrist is already here. The Antichrist is not a person. The Antichrist is a system. And as long as you keep thinking he's a person to be arriving on this scene one day, you'll never know he's already here. And in that, that's part of it right there alone. But then, aside from that, put your salvation into an allegory who doesn't exist, because then you won't realize you're the only one who can really help yourself. Keep waiting for the return of somebody who's not going to come. And I know it's going to, piss off a lot of people hearing me say that, and I've lost friends over it, but it's.
No, you're making an excellent point.
You
I
really
think
do the research, and you really.
by saying like the end of the conclusion to it, it's not just to sell a book. It's also, you have to make the experience yourself. You can only help yourself. The story, as you say,
Exactly.
somebody telling it to you that's belief. When you see it yourself, when you XP, that's the whole, XP. Put the XP
Then it
together
becomes
and
spiritual, right?
then it becomes
It
spiritual.
becomes knowledge, and no one can take that knowledge from you then.
And that's exactly it. I think that's the difference between Freemasonry and religion. Is everyone wants to call Freemasonry a religion, and they're really not, because religion kind of tend to want to prescribe this one-size-fits-all philosophy for everybody. And the fact is, Freemasonry recognizes the fact that the path to true enlightenment, or to true pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it, the path to God is similar. It's like your anatomy is very similar to everyone else's, but it's also unique. And that's the thing, I think. I really apologize about this horrible connection.
No, it's okay. Do you hear us?
Yep.
Awesome.
But
Okay, the path to God is.
How can we all have the same path to God when we, even if we were all traveling to the same point on Earth, any destination on the world, say we're all going to JFK Airport, we would all take a unique path to get there. We'd all be going to the same place. A lot of our paths would be quite similar, but we'd all be taking a unique path. And why should your spirituality be any different,
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference between Freemasonry and most religions. At least one of the differences, I should definitely say, because there's a lot. But I think people are definitely wrong to summarize them or conclude that they are a religion. And again, that's why we have so many different broken religions. But it's also why we can find similar themes between, like, the Aztecs and Indian type, different religions. You'll find all these similar, they've got huge oceans barriers kind of separating these cultures, but yet you'll find that they have these recurring themes in their religions and their spiritual beliefs. Now, how is this possible if the world was really separated? And that's another thing that my work kind of tends to touch upon is, just the simple fact that what we've been taught is not the truth. And it goes way further than you believe. I mean, every little aspect of what our history is a lie. I mean, they want you to believe Columbus, discovered America. We know Columbus didn't discover America, but we still celebrate Columbus Day. He's there in Washington, D.C., saying he discovered America. History is what they want to write it, and that's what goes in the history books. We know it's not true. What about Tesla? Why is he not in the history books? Why? Because they don't want him in the history books. Our history
Yeah.
is not what it really is, and the reason is because if we really knew what our true history was, we would know that we came from a much more evolved species, if you will. I don't know how else to describe it. We were, if we knew our true history, we would know that we are in fact divine beings, and we do have access to pure consciousness. We all have the power to have that Christ consciousness that Jesus had. And that's why anytime a new breakthrough could answer something, the truth about things that's always covered up, whether it's giant bones or all archaeological digs or scientific space exploration, anything that can lead us to the truth about our past is almost always, it's almost like it's even programmed into our thought process as a society to immediately reject these new ideas just because it contradicts what we were taught in school. And for that reason alone, we tend to reject these ideas, and without even thinking about it, let alone investigating, without even just thinking logically about what these people are saying.
Hmm.
And that's, I think it's definitely, we're at a threshold of humanity where we're kind of at the point where we can't take any more of that. We've had as much as we can take of that, and it's time for something different. It's time for a change. It's time for,
Yeah, it's
because
time for
it's
sharing
not,
the
it's,
information to make it known, so everybody can experience it for themselves. The internet's a big help. I
well,
mean, that's how we all find
imagine
each other. Mm.
imagine where the world would be now if we hadn't spent the last 3,000 years bickering over stupid, petty things like religion, which are really just misunderstood truths. I mean, they're so misunderstood truths that they become falsehoods.
Mm.
And that's to the point that they're even misunderstood. Imagine if we could set all of that aside as a species and just focus on bettering ourselves, bettering the species as a whole, the planet, and moving forward to something better, because God gave us everything we need right here on this earth to sustain us indefinitely, but the way we're using it, we're not going to last a couple more generations, and
Mm.
that's the sad truth, and that's a mathematical certainty. That's not a that's not a doom and gloom kind of type. This mathematics here, we're not going to last much longer at this rate. But God gave us a self-sustaining, self-correcting, self-perfecting ecosystem around us, and we're killing it. And we're killing it with these ideologies that are so outdated, but
Mm. Yeah.
they've got such a tight grip on everything that won't let go. And
And
so
that's where your work really becomes valuable because
it's amazing that how much.
you put a great effort and a close view into something seemingly so little. Put the light from different aspects on it, not like you learn it in school, not like you learn it in history, but the underlying truth to the
Well,
creation of something that is more than just a city and is more than just a capital.
Yeah.
and that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I don't want to guide you to a belief. Like I said earlier, I want you to draw your own conclusion. I want to equip you well enough that you can make an educated decision, or an educated choice on what you decide to believe about DC and all of this stuff, in fact. But I want you to make that decision yourself, because like we said, this is a journey you have to take on your own. I can show you the way, but you're the one that has to take the steps. And that's what it really boils down to.
Mm,
It,
mm.
it's really an obligation everyone you have to take on yourself. And some people never get to that point, but the thing is, your soul, we all got to do it at some point. That's a fact. Until we get it right, we're just going to keep repeating the same cycles over and over, and that's what we call reincarnation. until we get it right, and we need to get it right as a race, as a species, as a whole. We need to get it right. We can't just do it individually. It works for us to do it individually, but it only works for the individual. It doesn't work for the race. And so we need to get everybody in on the game and get this knowledge to everybody, so that we can do that, so that we can stop living in a world that's, doctors pervert medicine, lawyers pervert justice.
Yeah.
We need to get past that. We need to get
Free
towards
ourselves from the
healing
spells and
this
from the sigils that have been put on us, just kind of by looking at our surrounding and start creating and recreating it ourselves with a new intent.
Sure. Well, it's the world is so backwards that you're so desensitized to it that you don't even realize it most of your life, and then one day you wake up and realize, wow, everything really is backwards on this planet. And that's how well they've done their job.
Yeah.
And they've been working on it for thousands and thousands of years. And they've come a long way, though, to the point where most people, we're starting to wake up now, and I think it's because of 9/11, because 9/11 was a real turning point, because I think they really kind of got carried away. They got a little too cocky for their own good with that one, and they thought they could get away with a little more than they actually could. And we're starting to wake up to this, but for a long time they've been very effective about, keeping us severed, keeping us controlled, and now, it's starting to wake up, but we really, we're at a threshold where, the time is running out. Like I said, the planet's only got, it can sustain itself forever, but at this rate, we're not going to last. And that's the sad truth. So
I think it's also worth to entertain the thought that, they is just really us. That's just really we in a previous setting, in a previous
well, that's
just decided to play this game together.
That's kind of it too. Well, it's kind of it too. It's like you really can't blame the government for what's going on. I mean, the only people we can really blame is ourselves, because we're allowing it.
Yeah.
That's part of it, and also I think you're kind of touching upon how we all really are from the same source. We are the same source, kind of experiencing the world through different perspectives, which is, I think, what you were kind of touching upon. If I'm correct,
sure.
If not, correct me. But we really can't blame anyone but ourselves. We of course, our elections are not probably what they make them out to be. Personally, I don't believe that our elections really matter. I'm sure it's just as rigged as pro wrestling. They already have their outcomes predetermined long before anybody casts a ballot. That's my belief, though. I can't prove it or whatever. But I think we need to get back on track with these things.
Yeah. One by one, getting aware of our surroundings.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
really the Temet Noske, know thyself kind of approach, like, who are you and where are you and what are you doing here?
Our problems aren't Black Lives Matter. Our problems aren't everything the media wants to divert them to. Our problems are leadership problems. That's where our real problems lie. And that's the one problem that's never addressed. That's the one problem that's always averted. If something bad happens, it's about guns, or it's about, Black lives, or it's about homosexuals, or it's about everything but leaders. And that's the real problem, is the leaders. And it's up to us to do something about it. And the longer we wait to do it, the harder it'll be to do it, and the more we're going to have to do.
Right. Right.
Because the longer we wait, that's just another 1,000 years that they have to plan, work on their end. And they're actually working on their plan, while everyone else is just worrying about their bills and, trying to make ends meet and, getting their kids to soccer practice. These guys are actually working on new ways to keep you under the spell.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely, because we're covering up the older spells.
Sure.
And they need something new to catch up. But we'll catch up now that we have our systems in place here to communicate.
They're always working
on
new things, and it's like these chemtrails, and one of the things I just like to look at the world and think about things. You got all these chemtrails. I just want to look at it, just think logically. Why would they really be doing this? What is the purpose of these chemtrails? And you start to, is it possible maybe they're turning our atmosphere into a giant projection screen for holograms? It's quite possible. I mean, in fact, you look at the elements they're spraying in there, it even kind of makes a little bit of sense. They're always working on new stuff, and they always have been, and they always will. And it's as old as time itself, I believe. It really dates back to the procession, the turn of the procession. It's right there in D.C. In fact, when you start looking in the codes, you're going to find a lot of recurring themes involving the procession of the equinox, which is the Earth's wobble and how it rotates. Basically, it's like a spinning top, and it's got a wobble. And because it has this wobble, the result is a changing pole star over a long, long period of time. And of course, now our pole star is Polaris. We all know this, but it's not always going to be our pole star, and it hasn't always been our pole star. In fact, our old pole star was it Thuban? Yes, it was Thuban. Now that's again, we're representing the head of the serpent. So that used to be the center of the sky, the head of the serpent. When you read Revelations, you'll read about the war in heaven and how the angel fought back against the dragon fought back, and the angel threw the dragon out of heaven. This is really referencing the turning of the procession of the equinox, and you have Thuban there representing the dragon, and he was shifted out of the center, out of favor of God, by Michael, and Michael, or Polaris, took the new position. And that's what you're going to find. You're going to find behind a lot of the biblical passages, you're going to find truths that really, behind it's all really astrological. It's just like the alignment there on the winter solstice. It's also in the layout of Washington, D.C. All these different astrological alignments are really, there's underlying truth and meanings to them, and many of them are, much of the Bible itself, like I said, is related to astrology, because it's literally a guidebook for the macrocosm and the microcosm. So when you read the Bible, there's underlying themes in all of these stories that can often be related to either astrology or anatomy, or both. And I believe that's the underlying theme you're going to find in literally every book of the Bible. And again, it all had to be hidden because you can't tell the truth about these things in society and get away with it. So that's why Jesus spoke in his parables. And that's why the Bible is encoded in the way it is, because you got to keep these things secret. That's why you don't give them a throat chakra in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
great.
that time is over, and I believe it really, the Mayan calendar, was pointing to an Armageddon. Everybody was afraid that, it was pointing to the end of the world. I don't know where that all came from. What it was really pointing to was the turning of, and some might even call it Armageddon, and they might, in fact, they would be accurate. It was in 2012 that I personally began my investigation in Washington, D.C. And ironically enough, it was on December 21st, 2012, that I
Awesome.
put all the pieces together. Ironically enough, it was on that exact date. And in fact, you can look on my Facebook and go back and track it down, and you'll see that's exactly when it happened. And I know for a fact that I'm not the only person on this planet who had startling revelations around that date or since that date. And since that date, with increasing frequency, there's a lot of new information, a lot of new, previously unseen truths, undeniable truths, but, previously unseen, unknown, unthought of. A lot of truth coming to the light now from all sorts of directions and all sorts of aspects and all sorts of different studies and fields and whatnot.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you could say an apocalypse has begun to happen, because when you actually research what apocalypse really means, it's not about the end of the world. Its true meaning is an unveiling or disclosing of great knowledge. So in that sense, maybe the Mayans were, in fact, pointing accurately to an Armageddon, or an apocalypse, if you will, an unveiling of knowledge, because that's what's happening. And I think it's going to continue to happen. And I think it's not just through me, through a lot of people, it's going to continue to happen with more and more frequency, until there's nothing left to reveal, until all the secrets are revealed, and then maybe we can begin to heal as a
Yeah.
species.
And your focus being a very specific one, good information on that specific theme. Let us know before we come here to the end of the show. Let us know where we can get your book and maybe whatever website or links you want to share with us.
Sure. I don't really have a website yet. I'm gonna try and get one up soon. I've been saying that for a minute, but I've got limited means, and I'm only one person working
Yeah.
here. But you can definitely find me on Facebook, Robert Homrich, and definitely keep people updated on what's going on with that. I've got a YouTube channel as well, Rob Homrich. You can find all my videos, and the book is called it's called The Vitruvian Code: The Secret Anatomy of Washington D.C. and Its Connections to the Ancient Mysteries. And you can find it at the Create Space e-store or on Amazon.
Right. And I just simply got in touch with you on Facebook and said I wanted the book, and then you sent me a link, and that worked out great. I have my copy,
Yeah.
my digital copy, and that's awesome. Well, Rob, thank you so much. I think we touched a bunch of things here.
I think we did. I think we touched a lot of things.
We went through that. It was great fun for us. I hope we can do this
Awesome.
again, and we wish you so much
I had a lot of
success with your
fun too.
book.
Thank you guys for having me.
All right. Well, speak
Absolutely.
soon,
Thanks, guys.
and
Yeah.
Yep.
we'll be in touch.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
again.
you.
Bye
Yep.
bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.
Epic Poetry, written by Robert Homrich, written in stone. A riddle in stone, in front of your eyes, hiding the truth, deception, and lies. Look at it closer, and you will believe. Change your perception of what you perceive. They are fooling the masses about the design of a powerful city with powers divine. Ever so sacred is geometry, loaded with symbols from mythology. The square and the compass, the keys to it all, unlock their true secrets, and shrouds will soon fall. Squaring the circle, it's hard to digest. Just look at the master, Da Vinci knew best. Vitruvian man proportions derived, encoded in concrete, his secrets disguised. Great is the structure, the heart of the land, more ancient than Egypt, it rests on its sand. These are the templates for which you will need to master this knowledge, a code you will read. The wounds of Christ, the pyramid points, on Vitruvian man, the one who anoints. Sexual union can also be found, a Vesica Pisces on monumental ground, the bloodline of Christ encrypted in stone, of 200 years, so let it be known. And as you awaken to open your eyes, don't be mistaken by all of their lies. The kingdom of Satan is already here. It's long been established for hundreds of years. But God is the structure of all that you see, the nature of nature for eternity. His power is greater, His nature divine, the one true creator within your own mind. The temple of God is the temple within. You are the temple of King Solomon. So take up your crown upon your head, open your eyes, awaken the dead. Sigilium Dei a myth, the circle complete. The seal of God's truth destroys the elite. The wicked will cower when these words are spoken. Knowledge is power. This spell is now broken.